Good evening YouTube and welcome to part 2 of Project S2000. My name's James Stone and join us today on the video of taking the S2000 on the next stage of the build. So what I will stress straight from the beginning of the video is my car is never going to be a show and shine. Unfortunately, it's done a lot of mileage. She carries a few scratches and scrapes pretty much all over. So for those that are thinking, oh, don't do that to an S2000, they're rocketing in value, which I do agree. But ultimately, I bought this car for the engine and the gearbox to put potentially in something like a Westfield. Now, after driving the car and obviously remembering how much fun I had in Max, I thought, do you know what, let's try and bring her back. So like I say, in this video, we'll be going through the rust that I've encountered, going over what it's like to fit the fiberglass arch fenders and the future plans for the build. So the main goals for this build are to make it as light as possible, do it as cheaply as possible within reason. For those that have seen the other builds, I really don't want to be going any further and spending an absolute fortune on another money pit. And like I say, fun factor. It's a big thing. Like I say, I'm not planning to set the world on fire with it. I just want something that I can jump in, enjoy, maybe do something like a limits day in it, because we've got the Clio, like I say, and that's already gone too far really. But something that I can take on track, not really too fast if something goes wrong. Don't get me confused in saying that I wouldn't be upset if something happened to it. But ultimately, like I said in the beginning, I bought this car for the engine and the gearbox. But if we can have some fun for a year or two before that happens, brilliant. So as mentioned in the video, I am fitting the ASM fender extenders for the rear. Now, I'm going to also call them rust hiders, because any car that generally has this sort of thing, or someone who's willing to cut and drill into the rear quarter, is trying to mask a problem. I'm not saying all, but most, because it's the most cost-effective solution. Now, the ones I've got out there are actually replicas of the ASM fenders. And do you know what? For the money paid, they're pretty good, especially when you work out that to replace a rear quarter on an S2000 is going to be better part of $1,000 plus. Now, the reason I say that is you can buy them from Honda, but you've got to cut the old skin off and then you've got to fit the new one, weld it in place, prepare the bodywork, paint the bodywork. And like I say, that is not a cheap day out. Now, my right-hand side rear fender, it was bad. For those that saw the introduction video, it's rotten through. So like I say, this was going to give me a good solution of one, removing the rust, which is an absolute eyesore. Give it a bit more stance. Like I say, we'll discuss that later with the wheels, but like I say, it does, I think, look really cool and really makes them stand out. So as I say, in this video, we'll start stripping her down. So as mentioned, the ASM replica fenders that I've got are not genuine, so they weren't perfect, but I managed to get quite lucky that I found a used set on the Facebook marketplace for £50. The guy basically had bought them, decided that he didn't want to destroy his S2000, riveting those in, or like I say, cutting all the arches out if you did want to make full use of the extra travel for the wider wheels. Now, as I mentioned, the car isn't pristine, but it was an eyesore looking at the rust. So the first thing you have to do with the replica ones, and I have seen them on eBay new for about £150, is you're going to need to drill them, and you're also going to need to remove any of the sort of casting flaws. Now, I'll overlay an image here with the Dremel where I sort of cleaned those up. Once that was done, it was then simply a case of drilling all the holes through, making sure that obviously it all looked ready for preparation. At this stage, it was then on to wet sanding everything, putting a layer of primer down, letting it dry, and then onto the car. So first thing I did was get the car jacked up just to make sure everything was at working height. I'm going to be doing some work on it over the coming weeks anyway, so I thought, you know what, let's get it all jacked up, put it on the axle stands, and like I said, at least the arch then is almost at a good height where I'm not crouched down looking on it. It's actually at my eye level when I'm using my stool, aka the rear wheel, to work on the car. Something I will say, as I've learned with life, is a good saying I was told when I was doing my apprenticeship is measure twice and cut once. Now, this is definitely one of those situations that if you get it wrong, especially if your arch is good, you're going to cost yourself a lot of money. So the first thing I did was mark out where the arch sat, the extended arch even sat roughly on the bodywork, and the line I was going to use to cut the rust out. Now, from what I could see, which obviously was going to be difficult until I started cutting, was I was going to have at worst 20mm of overlap to play with. So it wasn't horrific. There was a lot of rust there, but like I say, by measuring it all out, I could be sure that this was going to be a safe move. But ultimately for me, I had no other option because of the rot in that current arch. So on to the scary part. Well, that was getting the 4-inch grinder out. I used a 1mm cutting disc, so nice and thin. Because of the rust I was hitting, it was apparent that it was going to cut through it very quickly. So I ended up having to go above the original line because the rust had really got under the paintwork, and just made sure I cut back so there wasn't any of that rot there that would return potentially again at a later date. Once I'd cut everything out, it was then a case of covering it with some primer. Now, long term, I'm going to use some proper undersealing there to really seal it so it doesn't have any further issues. The car's not going to be used in the winter or generally when it's wet because it's not going to have a roof on it, so I'm definitely not looking to drive it out in the rain. It'd only be if I got caught out. But at the same time, if you leave mild steel exposed, it will continue to rust. So like I say, by hopefully putting some primer on it for now, and then once I'm finished properly undersealing everything, that shouldn't spread any further. With it all cut out, I could now rest the arch in place, and I used masking tape just to hold it, stand back, make sure I was visually happy with how everything sat, and then I used a centre punch just to mark the holes where the rivets were. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't find my rivet gun anywhere. I had it years ago, I haven't used it for a long time, so I ended up just picking up a new Draper one off of eBay, which fingers crossed will be arriving in time for the weekend to get them on. So they are still in primer. But then once I've got the centre punch done, drill the hole, put the rivets in, should, fingers crossed, be the bulk of the work out the way. Now, with this, as I say, I'm not going to be able to body colour it properly because I might say out on the driveway. I don't really want to pay to put it through a body shop because, like I say, the car's not mint. So I'm toying with either a matte or a satin finish on it. And like I say, what I'll also do, which I'll discuss later in the video, is tie that in with a splitter. And like I say, at least then it will just look pleasing to the eye. None of that horrible rust, and because I've treated it, the rust shouldn't continue on going back through the rest of the arch and the rear quarter. So with everything cut and treated, I'll throw in a quick video clip here, and this shows it with the rear bumper back on. I gave the car a quick wash over, but as you can see, there's a good 2.5, 3 inches that I've taken away there. That's how bad that rust was, and like I said, it was just sitting up inside the ledge of the arch. Unfortunately, it's obviously done the damage over the time. But again, that shouldn't now get any worse. And like I say, with that fender on there, you're never going to know. So like most, I'm not a Honda purist. I've owned an EP3 in the past, but I've done most of my learning very quickly off of the Facebook group and the Owners Club. Now, something I wasn't aware of when I bought the car is with it being a JDM, it doesn't have a crash bar as standard. Now, when I was working on it at the weekend, I thought, you know what, I'll just get the bumper off so I don't do any damage to it when I'm cutting. And as I took the rear bumper off, more rust, a lot more rust. Now this wasn't a shock or a surprise because the previous owner had told me, unfortunately, that's where it's been failing on MOTs and causing him issues. So I knew it was going to be pretty bad under there. And as you can see from the clip I've overlaid, it was literally picking off. I've got a hole in the right hand corner, but I took the grinding disc out, buffed it all back, pleased that a lot of it cleaned up. Unfortunately, there are bits that look like it's going to need some work. Now, the question is it safe if I grind it all back and treat it? Now there's going to be parts on there that I can't repair, especially around the rear light cluster, but because I've still got sort of the rails on the back, I'm going to assume and ask you guys in the comments, is it safe to leave like that? Should I be looking at getting that fully repaired, or can I grind it back, treat it a little bit like what the previous owner's done on the left side and just enjoy it for a year or two? Another thing with the exterior is I am, like I say, going to remove the hardtop, soft top setup. So I will not have any roof on the car. This is to sort of prepare me for potential Westfield life later down the line. If I can do it with this car, then I can definitely do it with a kit car. Now, the soft top is leaking. The hardtop has been sold. So I needed a solution to keep the interior dry while I was working on the car. Now, originally I was going to do a full cover, but I've heard obviously and seen myself that they can trap moisture in. I didn't really want it on there on the driveway because it's a bit of an eyesore. But when I was browsing online, Halfords did do, it's like, I think they call it like a frost cover. It's like a little hood cover with 4 bungee cords on it. The idea being is it keeps the frost off the windscreen and it's waterproof. Now on the trade card, it came in at just over £10. I've clipped it on there, I've checked it today, everything seems dry under the top, so fingers crossed for the next couple of months until the garage is built. This will keep everything dry, or even if I'm out and about, I can just throw that on if it does start raining. Now obviously you can't drive with it on, I wouldn't dare, it definitely wouldn't stay on for long, but it just does keep the car waterproof when it's not in use, if it's stored outside. And like I say, it's easy enough just to put in the boot, because obviously once that soft top is completely removed, hopefully saving plenty of weight, but it just means it can't be outside in the elements. Moving back to the front of the car, like I say, I have got that crack in the splitter. As I mentioned, I'm going to remove that, potentially look to spray it in the same sort of colour as the rear, so it has that sort of match between the arch extenders and the front splitter, because they're not standard parts of the car. May take it off, find it's a good chunk of weight saved, and the bumper looks okay underneath, but I've got a little suspicion that there's going to be damage under there, so it's going to be used to mask that. But we will see, like I say, in one of the next videos. And ultimately I do need to machine polish the headlights. Now the JDM has got the xenons, but it hasn't got the xenon washers. Whether that's a standard thing, I don't know. All the UK ones seem to have the xenon washers there, but I'll machine polish back the original headlights just to make sure it looks nice and fresh from the front end. Suspension and brakes. Well, this is probably the weakest part of the car at the moment. Obviously, the brakes are pretty bad. I went straight through to metal on that rear one on the final leg home, which again was to be expected. Previous owner did advise me I wouldn't recommend driving it, but the old girl managed to get home. As I did in the intro video, you can hear the noise from the grinding on the rear disc where it was metal or metal contact. But I knew it was all going to go in the bin and be redone anyway. Now, I'm going to stick with the standard brake discs and calipers for the time being. I've seen a full rebuild kit online for £100, which includes the pistons and seals for the front and the rear. So what that'll do is just means I can refresh it all, but keep the single calipers, like I say, single piston calipers, and the dust seals for the time being. New discs and pads, unsure yet what to go with. It looks like that's going to be another £200 on top of it. So I would have thought by the time it's all done, it's probably going to be a £250, £300 day out. Discs and pads all round, seal kit, and obviously that will be me rebuilding the brakes up, which I'll show you guys in a video. The thing that obviously was clear when I started stripping the car down was the reason the rear pad has burnt out so quickly is the sliders are just absolutely seized. All the boots destroyed, they've rusted throughout, the caliper can't back off, so as soon as you press the brake, it just keeps the brake applied. So the good news is, hopefully see some potential power, because obviously, like I say, the rear brake's not going to be binding on anymore. Like I say, that will be detailed in a video later on. Wheels, well, this is a big one. For me, I did like the standard AP1 wheels. Matt was like, no, you've got to change them. And the problem I've now got is because I've got obviously those big arches on the back. I mean, you could get away with a 15mm spacer on the standard arch. Realistically, I'm probably going to need 30mm worth of spacing. So from what I've researched online, the standard AP1s are an ET65-ish. So I'm probably going to be needing like an ET30, ET35 on the rear to make it look nice and snug. Now, I'm not into that slammed life when the arches are all like tucked out and the wheels are poking out everywhere. I just like a clean look on the rear end. So probably now, after looking today, going to go with an aftermarket wheel, slightly wider rear tyre on there as well. Make use of that extra space I've created. And that's something, like I say, I'm going to be going through at the moment. I've had a look online today, seen some wheels I like the look of. Going to go second hand because, again, it's not a pristine build. I'm not looking for an A1 car, but it'd be nice to get some good rubber on there because I've got mixed match at the moment and some nicely stanced wheels front and rear just to finish off that look. And I'm probably going to go black wheels, black bodywork. It's not something I really do these days. I prefer the more sort of subtleness of black bodywork with silver wheels, but it's going to be a track car. So for me, I want it to look as aggressive as possible. Try and find some black wheels that are spaced correctly out of the factory. So in the intro video, I mentioned when pressing on in the corners that the car felt a little bit vague. Something felt disconnected from the rear. I did think this was bushes initially because obviously the age of the car. But when I took the rear wheel off to do the archwork, you could see the fluid misted and dripping all around that damper. So essentially I've got a pogo stick in the back at the moment if that thing has run out of fluid and the seals pop, which it looked like it is, and that would make sense for the vague feeling. So gonna have to do full suspension refresh, obviously with the stanced wheels and the arches. Stock suspension's way too high, pointless doing springs because the dampers are gone. So gonna need to find a used coilover set. Now, from driving Matt's, I think it's pronounced Tine, I mentioned it in the review on his one. That's the suspension I'll probably go with. Brand new, about £700. Used, in good condition. I saw a kit today online for around 450 quid. So not a terrible option, providing they're not too old and the collars still all adjust. Obviously I'll look to install a set of coilovers, which then brings me on to another issue. Something I wouldn't normally be aware of is apparently you need drive shaft spacers if you do plan to lower the car. So that's another thing I've got to put in. Again, when I go through the whole suspension install, you can follow me on that journey or headache or whatever we're going to call it, fitting the drive shaft spacers too. The final part for the suspension is going to be the bushes. Now, from what I've seen online, once you lower these, obviously you're going to need to geo everything. Everything gets seized, the bushes are tired. So I've been having a good look online at Powerflex's website and potentially look at just doing the whole lot. All new bushes, all new bolts, cut all the old stuff out and just get that thing absolutely dialed. So something again that's probably going to be a bit of a headache job, removing all the seized stuff or cutting it off potentially. Get all new bolts in there so that once the coilovers are on, and get it lowered, get all the geo set up, because from what again I've looked online, these are incredibly sensitive if it's not set up correctly. So certainly want to make sure that it's not a death trap on the road. And like I said, put a lever bar under the wishbone, gave it a move up and down. Everything seemed more solid than I thought. It was just that rear damper that was a little bit questionable. Like I say, we experienced that on the road. So that's it for the suspension and brake side of things. The engine, well, the heart of the car. The reason I bought the car, really, the engine and gearbox on these is such a peach. And they're claimed that the JDM runs a higher compression than the UK model. JDM standing for Japanese domestic market, generally better fuel over there. So they do run slightly higher compression, supposedly good for another 10 horsepower. So should we get it on Surrey Rolling Road? Should we see if it genuinely does make more power? From what I've seen on Rolling Road days before, these are realistically hitting more sort of 230 brake on a standard one. So old car, 230, 235 brake, I'd be happy if I saw that out of the old girl. But like I say, I'm sure we'll make a video on getting back to Surrey Rolling Road, putting it on the dyno and seeing what it's all about. Another video that I'm going to do for you guys is a compression test. Quite helpful, not so much on these because the engines aren't weak point for head gaskets and stuff, but gives me an idea of one, if the engine's healthy, and two, that it's worth continuing with this project. If that engine's underperforming, obviously I'm going to want to find out why, but being on the road and hopefully what you saw in the intro video, felt really good to drive and the power felt really strong, even with the brakes sticking on. Probably the most exciting bit for me is the interior. So as I mentioned in the review, I couldn't get comfy in the seats in Matt's, couldn't get comfy in the seats in mine. Didn't find them particularly supportive. Even in road driving, I was propping my legs against the door and the tunnel, sort of wedging my shoulders in place. Sat a little bit higher than I remember from the first time I drove one years ago. So for me, I want to put some proper seats in it. I want some proper light seats. I don't want the wraparounds again that I've put in the Clio because they are actually a nightmare on the road. I've been looking at a company called JK Composites based in the UK, and I've got to say, they look incredible. Seats are like 5 odd kilos. You can optionally spec them in black GRP with some red leather patches on there. So it sort of ties in with the sort of colour theme I'm going with that red and black on the car. Unsure whether I'm going to go harnesses. I don't know whether I can get away with running standard seat belts in them. Like I say, if I use my own sort of mounts for the frames on the seats, I could potentially look to incorporate the buckles, just easier. The harnesses in the Clio, like, it feels the part, but 90% of the time it is just a chore. But something again I'm going to need to look into in the coming episodes is if we can make sure that everything works using a standard seat belt. Some really light seats would be awesome. Something that's bugged me very, very early on with the S2000, and even again when I reviewed Matt's, is the lack of steering wheel adjustment. It's fine if you're short, but if you're like myself, over 6 foot, you find that when you're in the right seating position, the steering wheel is too far away. I'm stretching for the top. It just needs to come back 20, 30 mil, maybe a little bit more, but I'd be happy if I could get away with doing that. And the problem is, it doesn't seem like there's an option to space out the standard wheel safely. I saw something from China on eBay, looked a bit questionable, but if someone's tried it and it's worked, let me know, it'd be great to hear. But I think long term, it's going to be steering wheel boss, dish steering wheel, and obviously a 4-foot reach for the indicator stalks. But it'll be nice to have it in an area where you can catch the wheel correctly if needed, being rear wheel drive, generally quite snatchy. So that's something I'm going to need to look into. Save a bit of weight as well, removing the airbag, which will be nice, but I do like the look and the finish of the standard wheel. The final bits for the interior: remove all the radio and audio stuff, it's no longer needed. Remove all the sound deadening. I believe there's going to be quite a bit under the carpets. I've done it on other cars before with the Clio. Going to look to do it with the E46 M3 and potentially remove the carpets. Now at first I was like, yeah, rip it all out, and then I thought, you know what, with the armrest, the door cards, the carpets and some buckets, it's still got an element that it feels like, not I'm going to say a comfortable or practical car, but it still has some creature comforts. The issue I got with the Clio I built, for those that followed the channel, is it is hardcore. It really is just too much if you're not in the mood for it. Whereas this, I want it to be something that we can go and play with the limits on track with, if I ever get it on track. And at the same time, if I want to go out for a pub lunch in it, I can just go for a hoon down the road and it's still a nice place to be, and you can just enjoy that VTEC. So hope you enjoyed the video. Plenty more stuff to come on the old girl. Like I say, we're getting really stuck into it now. The weather's only going to get better, and the goal is to have it on the road this summer. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure you give us a thumbs up and a subscribe. Thanks for watching. Until next time.